Hey everyone, welcome to the Games Are Fun podcast. My name is Luke Armstrong. I'm your host, and today is May 6, 2026. In today's special episode of Games Are Fun podcast, I'm going to be reviewing Monster Crown Sin Eater, a game from Studio Aurum based in Newfoundland, St. John's, Newfoundland, in fact. And shout out to the developers for providing me with a review copy of this game. Monster Crown Sin Eater is a 2D pixel monster-taming RPG game. It's available for PC, Nintendo Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation 5. I played it on my desktop PC, and I can't wait to go over all the things I liked, some of the things I disliked about this game. But before I do that, I wanted to give a quick rundown about Monster Crown Sin Eater. And basically, it is a 2D pixel art game where you're collecting monsters, you're taming them, and you're battling them. If you've played a Pokemon game, you're going to be very familiar with a lot of the gameplay elements that are going on in Monster Crown. It's very similar, and there's a lot of comparisons to draw there, but there are also a lot of different things happening in Monster Crown Sin Eater that you don't see in a traditional Pokemon game, and some of those elements are actually the reason why I enjoyed this game so much and wanted to keep playing it. In the game, you play as Azur, a young farm boy who's basically wanted to be a monster tamer his whole life, and his brother is a monster tamer, and it's set in Crown Nation. And basically, I don't want to go too much into the story because from early on in this game's narrative, there are moments that happen that actually caught me off guard in the best way possible. And I wish I could just talk about them right at the beginning of this review, because they do happen fairly early in the game, but I want you to experience that for yourself if you do decide to play Monster Crown Sin Eater. And when those moments happened, I actually decided, okay, I'm going to continue playing this game because I have a little bit of skepticism going into a monster taming game. As someone who is a fan of Pokemon, I played a lot of the Pokemon games, and some of these games that take a lot of elements from Pokemon and create their own identity in game, I kind of have a hard time connecting with sometimes. You know, games like Temtem or Pal World, or there was another one I played called Coromon, and all those games were fun in their own way, but they didn't really capture me for more than a few hours. I will say that Monster Crown Sin Eater did capture me after that 2-hour mark because the game's narrative was going to places I didn't really expect. This game has a much more mature tone than a Pokemon narrative, and it was because of that more mature narrative that I wanted to see where this game was actually going. Right off the bat, when I booted this game up on my PC, I was really drawn in by the pixel graphics. They really captured that kind of nostalgic feeling from playing a Gen 1 or 2 Pokemon game on the Game Boy Color back in the day. And that art style was one of the highlights for me, but at times I found it kind of clashing with the game's narrative because this narrative had a bit of a more mature tone to it. I did find it difficult to kind of be totally drawn into that tone set by the narrative because of this kind of cartoonishy, bright, classic pixel art style. That didn't mean it was impossible. It just initially off the bat, when those more serious, mature moments happened, it was a little bit more difficult for me to get into it. So this game is basically an open world type game with some restrictions, especially in the first area. You are kind of gated to this first area until you can complete a boss. And within this first area of monster taming, you go around collecting monsters. And some of these monsters are, to be quite honest, the designs, some of them range from really cool to absolutely absurd looking, in my opinion. There are some that really capture a vibe in terms of, they're going for something more evil or sinister looking. This one's going for a bit more of a cute look. They did seem a little bit random and nonsensical in some of their designs, but it wasn't completely a miss every single time I came across a new monster. Some of the other Pokemon-like games that try to design custom monsters have a hard time, especially because Pokemon, this insane major IP, has captured a ton of different types of designs when it comes to Pokemon, right? There's thousands of Pokemon, and you throw in all these other solo devs and smaller projects that have created their own custom monsters. It can be challenging to kind of come up with something that isn't like Fire Dog or Water Bat or something like, take an element and take an animal and just combine them together and boom, there's your monster. And I felt like there were some designs that were really cool and original to this game that I hadn't really seen before. And then there were some elements that I was like, okay, I've definitely seen these in other types of monster taming games. But again, I don't fault the devs for that because it's really hard to get creative with some of these monster designs. But now, the map of this game is kind of restricted in the first area, but things do kind of open up a little bit more. The wild areas that you explore do feel a bit bigger than a traditional Pokemon game, but there are no random encounters. You do see all the monsters running about on the map, so you can just go up to them, fight them, and then try to tame them. The battle animations that would occur when you went up to these monsters and decided to battle them were really one of the big highlights for me, because I felt like the animations for some of the battle attacks were really cool and stylized in a way that I wasn't expecting. There were some like fire attacks that just have full fire animations going on the screen that really surprised me and I thought looked really solid and really crisp in terms of pixel art. So props to the devs on that. That was a huge highlight for me. And another big highlight for me was the soundtrack. I thought it was really paired well with certain moments in the game. Some of the battle songs were looping in a way in my head that was not annoying. It was actually quite catchy. And I loved some of the kind of old school, 8-bit, 16-bit chip tunes that were happening. So again, those two things I really wanted to highlight because there were parts of the game design that I think a lot of people don't really put a lot of attention into, but you could tell the devs were. And when devs put attention into these little things like battle animations and battle songs and soundtracks, I think it goes a long way and really stands out for me. So transitioning more into some of the more complications with this game that I had were, I think initially it can be a little overwhelming with how many monsters there are. You kind of feel like there's this endless list of just kind of like endlessly generated monster designs, because some of the names of some of these monsters are really just kind of letters jumbled up. And again, that goes back to talking about the design. It can be hard to come up with an original monster design that doesn't look like a Pokemon or doesn't look like something that's already created. And same goes for the naming element. But there were moments of that where I just felt like I was getting a little bit overwhelmed with what to do. And then they threw on taming and breeding, which is a really cool element to this game. It is an element that makes this game unique in its own. And sorry, I shouldn't say just taming and breeding. Obviously, you're taming the monsters when you use one of your packs on them and they join your crew, but you're also actually breeding the monsters and you can fuse the monsters together. So if you have a certain monster that's like level 30 and a specific type, you can fuse it with another monster and it will kind of combine some of the stats. It will come up with a level that is similar to those two monsters being fused together, and it will actually allow you to combine some of the attacks that you had from both of those monsters, which I thought was really cool. You're not just limited to 4 attacks, right? You could actually have, I don't know what the max number was, but I believe on some of my monsters that I fused together, there were at least 6 different attack options, 6 or 7 attack options at my disposal, which I thought was pretty cool. But again, maybe a little bit overwhelming in the sense that I don't need that many options for every monster. And of course, they don't show up for every monster. Some of those early caught monsters wouldn't have that, but maybe a monster that's been fused down several generations is going to be a combination of all these different things. So The fusion element was kind of interesting. You could kind of change some of the genes from each of the monsters. But I didn't get too into the weeds with the fusion and the breeding because I was just kind of focused on, occasionally collecting a huge bunch of monsters and then I'd fuse some of them together. And it wasn't something that I totally focused a ton of time onto, but I could see where a player would. And so I did enjoy that there was that option and gameplay mechanic where you don't necessarily see those types of things in a monster taming game. And so I appreciate that the devs, again, spent that time to put that system in place. It just wasn't one that I cared about too much and wanted to dive into a whole lot. One of the things that I wanted to transition into is a major issue I had with the first section of the game. And that is you're kind of stuck to this first general province of Crown Nation, and I was a little bit lost on what to do at times. It can feel a little bit aimless, and you're kind of running around in circles, figuring out what to do while also leveling up your monsters. You get to a point where you kind of explore all the corners of this first province, and then you're like, what else do I need to do here? I'm stuck. I can't go into the second area. There is a blockage on kind of two routes to the second area. And you basically are locked into this area until you can complete a boss battle. And the boss battle was a significant spike in difficulty. And it was one that I didn't really appreciate as the player that much. I felt it was a bit out of balance from where the game was up until that point, because you're basically collecting these monsters. You're able to kind of tame some of them at level 30, I think is the highest levels I would see out in the wild areas in that first section. And you think, okay, that's pretty high for a first section. You're not seeing too many higher than level 27, maybe level 30. And so I'm leveling some of my monsters up to 36, 37. And I went into this boss battle and I thought I could just kind of fight my way into this battle quite easily, and that did not occur whatsoever. And I had to grind a little bit to level up these monsters. And so if you're a fan of level grinding, that is something that you might enjoy. I find it a little bit repetitive of just kind of constantly going out and battling, finding other monster tamers out in the wild that you can battle with. I feel like those are the best way to gain a bunch of XP at one time, as opposed to going to just random monsters, fighting them in a single battle. The tamers kind of offered, a bit more of a battle in the sense that they would have 3 or 4 monsters that you could gain XP from if you killed them all. And so that grind in the initial section really slowed the momentum down, because in that first 2 to 3 hours, I felt like the game was really resonating with me. And then when I came to that wall and had to do that level grinding, it just kind of lost a lot of momentum for me. Now I did power on and I enjoyed further elements of this game and collecting more monsters and seeing the different landscapes that the different areas provided. That was all enjoyable after the fact, but that initial kind of influx in difficulty there did kind of catch me off guard to a point where I was questioning, do I continue on with this or not? But I did persevere. So it did feel good to kind of have that accomplishment, right? It's like when you play a really challenging video game and you die and die and die and you can't get over the level. But when you finally do, it does feel like you accomplished something. So that could be some intention on the developer side of like giving you this tough obstacle right off the bat. But it did kind of also rub me the wrong way with how that unfolded narratively, because there were moments in the game that were being set up. And like I alluded to earlier in this review, talking about the more mature tone and being kind of pleasantly surprised by some of those choices that were happening narratively. And I thought there was going to be big payoffs for that in terms of, let's say there was something bad that occurs. I was hoping that there were going to be this kind of build up to kind of finally address this big bad thing that happened. And I was able to kind of just like wrap that up in the first kind of section of the game. And I thought that was going to be stretched out a lot further. And again, it's a narrative choice that just didn't really jive with me, because I kind of was creating these expectations, right, of where the story could go. And when it went against what I was thinking, you're a little bit, do I like this or do I not like this? And so, yeah, just the combination of the difficulty spike and where those narrative kind of peaks happened right near the beginning of the game, I was a little bit surprised with just kind of, yeah, how that kind of changed my overall feeling of the game. But to kind of bring it back in a little bit, overall, I think the game is fantastic. I think if you are on the Nintendo Switch or playing on Steam Deck, I think this is a perfect pickup. If you have played monster collecting and taming games before, like Pokemon, and you enjoy those, I highly recommend checking this one out. With reviews on the Games Are Fun podcast, I basically give the game a recommendation, or I say, no, don't buy it. It's not worth your time. Sometimes I could say, hey, wait for this one to cook a little bit more, especially if it's an early access game, and maybe pick it up when it goes on sale down the line. This game is one that I recommend you pick up, as I mentioned, if you have a portable device. I played it on my PC, and while that was tolerable, it wasn't the ideal way to play. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more if it was accessible and a game that I could kind of, play on the couch, play in before bed or something like that. And of course, if you're a fan of, solo indie devs taking on projects that are inspired by some of those big fun games we played, especially back in the day, go support those devs. I think Studio Aurum for taking on this type of game and kind of doing some unique original things, I really commend them. I think there's a lot of originality in this game that you don't see in some other monster collecting and monster taming games. So I definitely think it's worth your time because of that. And, we always want Nintendo to come out with a new 2D Zelda or a game that we experienced back on the SNES or Nintendo 64 and recapture that magic. And I just don't think that's going to come from these big developers. You're going to have to look to the indie developers to create these kind of cool, unique experiences in genres and, worlds that we have kind of seen before, just with a new take. And so I really enjoyed it for that. If you like games in that kind of category, I mean, it's a category in itself, right? These kind of retro-inspired indie games that are trying to capture a feeling and a look of a game design that is from a time that seems to kind of be only really supported by indie devs. And so that's another big reason why I think Monster Crown Sin Eater is worth your time. A really solid indie game, and I'm really glad I played it. Before I end off today's episode of the podcast, I wanted to mention a few things that are on the horizon that I wanted to mention at the beginning of the show, but I wanted to really give Monster Crown that spotlight at the beginning, and so I'm saving a little bit of the housekeeping stuff for the end of the show. A couple things that are on the horizon are quite a few different game reviews, kind of ranging in types of games, and some of them are older releases too. Not that, well, some of them are definitely more than a few years old. First being Kingdom Come Deliverance from 2018, the first one. I've been playing that game, and it's probably going to be a while before that episode drops, but I have been playing that game, and it's been fantastic. I also am very close to getting the platinum for Ghost of Yotei, and that is going to be a review episode in its own. And there is also a few indie games that are cooking in the oven that I got some review codes for, and so I'm excited to be sharing those on the channel in the future. And I also want to give a huge shout out to any of the audience that listened to the last few episodes over on YouTube. Since reviving this podcast, YouTube wasn't really a platform that we were traditionally on. We did the last probably maybe 15 episodes of the podcast, or maybe 20 episodes. I don't know exactly what it was. And we had a video version that we put on on YouTube, as well as regular podcast services. And it didn't really catch on too much, but I will say just uploading the RSS feed to YouTube, there's been a bit more discoverability than I was expecting over on YouTube. And I think the last show on Marathon got a few comments. So shout out to anyone who dropped a comment on the YouTube video from last week. Really appreciate getting those comments. Drop a comment on the show. If you're listening on Spotify, that's another place you can do it. In the future, once the show gets its feet again, I really like to do more audience segments where we're posing questions and you can answer them in the comment section and we can read them out on next week's episode. So that's something I'd like to bring back to the show. Longtime viewers remember Question of the Week. That was a reoccurring segment that we did, and I'd like to do that again. So also make sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and like I said, our YouTube channel. It would be greatly appreciated if you could head over to YouTube and subscribe over there, even if you listen to the show on the audio platforms like Apple and Spotify. It just goes a long way in having the show be discovered by other listeners. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks again to Studio Aurum for providing me with a review copy for Monster Crown Sin Eater. And I will catch you guys in the next episode, which is going to be all about video game fever dreams and the video games I played in my youth that I still dream about to this day. They made an impact on my psyche in a way that I have these weird reoccurring dreams in some of these video game worlds. So that's a little tease for the next episode of Games Are Fun. Don't want to miss that one. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you on the next episode. See you later.